The Art of Being Alone by Renuka Gavrani is quite possibly the worst book we've read so far. This book constantly contradicts itself, has a lot of spelling and grammar issues, and overall just gives terrible advice. So today I'm going to be talking about this book all the while we work on a couple of buildings here, and those are the barbershop and the apartment. However, I'm running out of wood, so we're going to need to spend a lot of today's video just gathering wood, and hopefully this makes builds that we do in the future a whole lot easier. So while we chop down all these trees, let's go ahead and summarize the book. So like I said, today's book is The Art of Being Alone by Renuka Gavrani. And from what I could tell when I first started reading this book is this book seeks to answer how to not feel lonely when you're stuck being by yourself. So it's the point of the book to try and figure out ways for you to feel less lonely. Now, in the very first chapter, we already get into some contradictory information. The author makes it a point to explain that you should not romanticize your life. Apparently, there's been this whole big trend of romanticizing your life on like Instagram or something, and the author is like, nope, please do not do that. And I guess romanticizing your life is sort of like pretending you're in a movie, you know? Just like everything that you do could be a cinematic shot. That's the way I view romanticizing your life. I'm not sure if you guys have different definitions on that. But then the author also says that if you're desperate, you shouldn't be making friends. So like if you're lonely and you desperately need friends, you shouldn't make friends because you're going to be making friends with what she calls desperate energy. And nobody wants to be friends with someone who has desperate energy, apparently. And this to me reeks of like, oh, you can't tell people you like them, you know, you got to be like cool about it. You got to be nonchalant. And that's so stupid, right? If you want to be friends with someone, you go and be friends with them, all right? You don't have to worry about being, you know, too desperate for a friendship. That's like some of the worst advice you could give to someone is like, you gotta act like you don't actually want to be friends with them. You don't want to seem too desperate. But yeah, we're still in the first chapter. And the author has essentially said, don't make friends, don't romanticize your life. But then we finish off the chapter by her saying, you are the main character, and you have to act like the main character. Huh? Was not your first point to say that you shouldn't romanticize your life, and now you're telling us that we should romanticize our life and act like the main character? What an odd thing to say. So that's like the first chapter of the book, and after reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, we're in for a treat. And if you're wondering why I'm reading this book at all, it's because YouTube Studio has this like trendy new AI feature that recommends search terms. And like, hey, this search term is related to your content. You should make a video on it. And one of the search terms I got was this book. And I was like, okay, sure, yeah, I'll try this out. And I am so glad that I did. Also, I'd just like to mention that it's usually a good idea with nonfiction books like this to go and check for sources in the book, because that's kind of where the author gets all of their information. This book is filled with quotes from Taylor Swift, and then there's 3 sources. There's like 3 academic articles that this book cites. So that was another indication that this book was going to be a phenomenal piece of literature. Anyway, we're on to the next chapter now, in which the author tries to define what loneliness even is, and she says that loneliness is when you've lost yourself, right? You've changed so much that you're no longer yourself. I don't know about you, but that's not how I would define loneliness. Loneliness to me is if you're like by yourself and you want to be with others, but you're stuck being alone. That's loneliness. But I guess what this author is trying to go with is like you still hang out with a ton of people, but when you're with other people, you don't act like yourself. And because of that, you feel lonely. So like I kind of understand the definition. So one of her solutions to this is to don't always say yes to people. So if you're feeling lonely and someone asks you to hang out and it's not something you want to do, say no. Which isn't terrible advice, I guess, but it's kind of an odd thing to put so early in the book. To me, this should be something that you put later in the book, like, hey, this is how you hang out with people, but be sure not to lose yourself. No, it's the first chapters. Don't lose yourself trying to make friends. So I don't know, that's an interesting choice. This chapter isn't really terrible. It kind of just talks about how you should be your authentic self and not a palatable version of you, which yeah, I agree with. You shouldn't change yourself in order to be friends with people, and that's generally just good advice. It's also very basic advice that almost everyone knows, right? Just be yourself and you'll have friends or whatever. Like, okay, yeah, sure. Great advice. Thank you very much. So now we're on to chapter 3. First point of chapter 3 is that self-love does not equal buying a bunch of things. Apparently this is a big thing on like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube apparently, where I guess people are advertising self-love as just buying a bunch of things for yourself. So yeah, good advice. Self-love is not just buying things. The second point of chapter 3 is to accept who you are, which I think that was sort of the point of chapter 2, is just accept who you are and don't change for others. So honestly, yeah, sure, good point. Oh, but then we get into point number 3, guys. And point number 3 is embrace your dark side. Not just acknowledge your dark side and accept that as a part of who you are, embrace it. And the author talks about how she embraced how she's selfish, which she doesn't elaborate too much on. She just says like, yes, I accepted that I'm selfish. And then nothing happens. So she's finally accepted that she's selfish and then she's like doing nothing about it. I think this is whack and horrible advice. If you have a dark side, like being selfish, you should not embrace being selfish. I guess what you should do is just recognize that you are selfish and try to take actions that, aren't as selfish as you typically are. Embracing it though, do not embrace being selfish, alright? Being selfish is not a good trait. Anyways, we're on to chapter 4 now. And like most of these chapters, this chapter starts off pretty good. I actually really liked how this chapter started off, and it was talking about how if you love yourself, you can never be lonely. Which, that's a cool concept. I like that. If you love yourself, you can't be lonely. It's a cool concept. I'm not sure if it's actually real, If they put me in one of those like solitary confinement chambers, I'm probably going to feel a little lonely, right? But I digress. However, then the author talks about like a personal story, which is just whack. She basically recounts her experience from college. She was really excited to meet new friends in college, and she had a roommate that she got along with really well, and they were great friends. But then somehow the author gets sick and has to go back to her hometown for like 15 days. And when she comes back, her friend has new friends. Oh my gosh. And instead of acting like a normal person and just like continuing to hang out with your friend, the author says, you gotta choose. Is it your new friends or is it me? Maybe this is her just, embracing her selfishness or whatever, but who in the world says that? Now here's the problem with saying it's either this or it's me. Both outcomes to that action are completely undesirable. Either A, your friend is like, well, we're not being friends anymore, and you lose a friend. Or you get option B, which your friend abandons their new friends and then spites you for the rest of your relationship. It's like, I gotta be friends with this person, and this person's toxic because they made me get rid of all my other friends. So both outcomes are completely undesirable, and you should never use this tactic against anyone, but you either lose the thing you want, or you get the thing you want, but they spite you for the rest of your life. Throughout the entire book, there's this undertone that the author has been betrayed by their friends and abandoned by all of them. And this chapter kind of seems like it exists just to spite the friends, because then the author talks about how the only one you can ever depend on is yourself. You can't depend on any of your friends, you can't depend on anything or anyone, you can only depend on yourself. Which, is a fair point if it wasn't set out of spite. If you have good friends, then you can in fact rely on them. Of course, don't abuse that power, but, friends are there to be there for you. Anyway, yeah, the author straight up says friends are seasonal. They come and they go. If I'm lonely, this is horrible advice, right? To view all friendships as temporary and something that will not last. And that's because this author is just full of spite because her friends abandoned her. And I wonder why when you're confronting them with, it's either your friends or me. Anyway, the book decides to take a weird turn here and change from a self-help book for the lonely into a self-help book on how to be productive and have healthy habits. Because that's exactly the type of book I wanted to read, Oh, The Art of Being Alone? Definitely a habit book. I'm gonna read that. The first of these habit building chapters isn't terrible. I mean, the first point in the book is terrible, and it talks about how the successful people never have friend groups, which is I don't know, kind of whack. If you want to be successful, you can't have friends, guys, not allowed. But then the book actually has a pretty good societal critique that I appreciated, and that was basically about how people, when they want to become productive, they search up how to be productive instead of just doing the thing they want to be productive for. If you want to be more productive, just do the thing you want to do. Not that hard. Motivation isn't real, you just gotta sit down and actually do it. But then for some reason, the last part of this chapter is just like really cool. And it talks about your brain being a stomach. And essentially what it talks about is you can't just sit there and consume content for 8 hours a day. Just like you can't sit down and just eat for 8 hours a day. You know, you got to break it up. You got to have time to digest. And this was actually the only good point in the book. But it was talking about how you have to enjoy just sitting there and letting your brain rest and digest. Even if you want to be productive, you can't be productive for like 12 hours a day because your brain needs time to rest and you're just going to get burnt out or you're just going to get exhausted or something like that. And this is actually surprisingly in line with a lot of schedules I've seen. Like if you look at how Theodore Roosevelt lived his life, I think he had pretty unproductive days for the most part, except for these 90-minute bouts of just intense study or intense work. I've found that technique to actually be pretty useful and good, so it's surprising to see that piece of advice in such a garbage book like this. But even a dead clock is correct twice a day, you know? So, really big fan of the brain being a stomach concept. Gotta have time to digest, and you can't be scrolling Instagram while you digest information. You gotta just sit there and think about it. And this is actually why a lot of people have shower thoughts. And it's because the shower is now like the only place in your life where you don't use a phone. So it's the only time your brain gets to think, and that's why you have a bunch of cool thoughts while you're in the shower. Or like right before you're going to sleep, and it's because you just have so much content that you're consuming throughout the day that when your brain finally gets to relax and digest stuff, that's when your creativity actually gets to bloom. The book didn't talk about shower thoughts, that's just something I know. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, this part of the book kind of just devolves into habit building. The author talks about how, like, your only friend should be success, which is kind of weird. You know, you should have other friends. And then it also talks about how if you want to be successful, you got to take action and you got to define what success means to you. And then we've also got, like, a bunch of pointless chapters in this section. And, like, they're 2 pages long, and it's basically a chapter that advertises the next chapter. Such a weird thing to do in a book. It also talks about how if you're lonely, that's like a mental issue, and that means that there's something wrong with the situation you're in. So the author suggests just taking like a list and writing down everything that you hate in your life. And then the author's like, all right, choose one of those things and focus on improving it. And then the author says that if you hate being alone, it's because you have nothing to offer to yourself. And then finally, we're at the last chapter of the book, which kind of goes back to the loneliness stuff instead of the habit building. And this chapter just suggests a bunch of weird stuff all at once. The first thing is, it talks about how if you've always dreamed about doing something with a group of friends, just go and do the thing that you want to do with the group of friends, but by yourself. And man, I don't know about you, but that would make me feel more lonely. Like, I think it would be really fun to go over to Epcot down in, like, Disney, Florida Disney, and just get a beer at each country in the like tour of the world or whatever. I don't even know what it's called. But imagine me taking that advice. I'm like, yes, I'm going to go to Epcot and get a beer at every country as I walk around by myself in Disney World. That's really depressing. So not very useful advice on that front. The next suggestion is to write love letters to yourself. Again, this would just make me feel lonely as well, because that would mean that I have no one that is close enough to me to write love letters. I gotta do it myself. Like, maybe if you hate yourself, that's a good tactic, but I'm pretty happy with myself. I just write a smutty letter to myself. And what I find completely ironic is that the final statement in this book is the first contradiction that the author made. And the author's like, go ahead, romanticize your life, it's good for you. And she straight up just uses the word romanticize, which she said not to do. So that's whack. She contradicted herself twice, guys. And yeah, guys, that is essentially a summary of the book. Now, before we move into the next section, I just wanted to highlight some of the egregious English used in this book. And just as a reminder, this book is only like 150 pages and is self-published. But at only 150 pages or so, we get a ton of spelling errors, a ton of punctuation errors, and just weird sentences in general. So let's do this rapid fire. Why do you hate the idea of being with yourself so much that the time you spend with yourself is now considered loneliness and there should be some instant hacks and techniques to deal with it? Yet, those same 150 kids people became included people who are my friends. We have learned that the kid who eats alone sits alone and has no friends is pathetic. I look forward to every day enjoying on more thing. This sentence is missing a space after the period. I had a close friend in high school who is now married, but I had to leave her because I changed school. And if you cannot find a reason to like it, then create some. See, I don't have any intention to make you feel bad, I'm just introducing you to your reality. You are living in a bubble if you think that just by imagining and wishing to become successful, you will become so. That too when you don't know what success means to you. And if my goal was to get as much as done, then why was I forcing myself to? That's the reason I chose talking walks in the evening. Whenever I feel burned out with my work or general life worries, I dim the lights, light a candle, order pasta, make iced coffee, and watch a Christmas movie. This sentence is grammatically correct, but who in the world is ordering pasta? That's like one of the cheapest things to make. Everyone should know how to make pasta. But they order pasta, but make iced coffee? So the iced coffee is the easy thing, apparently. That's a ton of errors for a book that's only 150 pages. Now, trust me, I don't want to leave you guys empty-handed. Whoa, what in the world is that? Hold on. I don't think I've ever seen one of these before. Isn't there like a hidden room or something? Yeah, what's down here? But yeah, since the book did a horrible job of explaining how to deal with loneliness, I'm just going to share some of the tips that I've discovered throughout my life. Oh, what a beautiful sight. So my first tip is basically to put yourself in situations where you can meet people. And I know that's pretty vague, but basically what I'm thinking here is, if you have a job, there's a ton of people you work with, and it's really easy to hang out with them. If you don't have a job, go get a job, and then you'll have people to hang out with, right? Oftentimes, coworkers are in very similar situations to you, so you just gotta be the person that actually invites people to things. Just be like, hey, do you guys want to go bowling? And oftentimes, like, if you've got a good relationship with your coworkers, they'll go with you. So I highly recommend doing that if you're just looking for people to hang out with. It actually makes work a lot more fun if your coworkers become your friends. But this can be with other things too, right? If you're really into some hobby that has public events, go to those public events, The people that go there are interested in the same things as you are. And it doesn't hurt to try things, right? So just go try it out, even if you're scared of doing it. You're not going to fix your loneliness by just like sitting in your apartment or your house and talking to nobody. Man, I love farming jungle wood. You only need like 6 trees and you get like 8 stacks of wood. My next point kind of ties in with that, but it's to find some hobbies. If you're in like a really secluded situation and you're just sitting there scrolling Instagram or TikTok or just watching YouTube videos, you're gonna feel lonely because social media shows you like all the fun that everyone else is having, But if you occupy your time with hobbies, then you'll spend less time thinking about like how lonely you are. I know that sounds sad, but it's honestly not. For instance, my hobby is playing Minecraft and reading books. Like, those are my main hobbies. And it occupies so much time that I don't really have time to think about, like, oh, I haven't hung out with said person in a long time, But also when you're, like, reading a book, you're not really thinking about yourself too much. You're thinking about the story in a book. I used to hate reading, but I got back into reading my freshman year of college, which was when COVID hit. And I was kind of just trapped in a dorm room by myself, and I had nobody to talk to. I was in an out-of-state college, and I was pretty miserable that first semester. But then the second semester, I got everything sorted out, found some hobbies, which was reading books. And, when you occupy your time with other things, you have less to worry about. My next tip is kind of a habit to develop, but that is journaling. If you don't have anyone to talk to, it can get kind of stressful holding in all the, like, emotion and stuff you have. But if you have a journal, then you can just vent to your journal. And it helps to get out, like, what you're thinking. It doesn't even have to be emotional stuff, right? If I'm just thinking about, like, the state of the world or just, like, my opinion on something, I can write it down in my journal. It stays private. I get it off of my chest and I feel less stressed. So I think journaling is just a good habit to have in general. It's very easy. You just sit down and you write whatever you want. And I suppose my last tip is pretty vague, but it's essentially to just like treat your life as a garden. A lonely person's garden, right, is just soil. There's no seeds, there's no plants, there's nothing that'll attract people or whatever to come to your garden. And no matter the garden, as long as you plant things, little creatures will come eventually. But it basically means, just like take care of yourself, do good things, have healthy habits so that when eventually someone comes by, they'll appreciate your garden and they might stick around. So yeah, I think we've gathered enough materials for this build. And I haven't really done this before on the series, but what if we try out a little time-lapse action? So yeah, final thoughts on the book. I think it's a really bad book. Its only redeeming quality is that it only took me like 3 to 4 hours to read, so that was really nice. In general though, I think it gives really bad advice, and if you follow the advice, you're gonna ruin your life. There's definitely a balance between finding solitude in your life and just pointlessly isolating yourself from the rest of this world like this book seems to promote. And if you're looking for good books on how to build habits, I highly recommend Atomic Habits. I've got a video on that. Atomic Habits is dedicated on how to build habits, so like it's really good at that. Anyway, this is the build. This build here on the left is supposed to be like a apartment building, and this is going to house a ton of villagers, but we've got little tiny apartment rooms, you know. Apartments. You can also go up the side of these buildings and enter the apartments on the top floor, which all have these little patios, and because of the campfires, you can't like fall off. You have to crouch to even get over, and villagers can't do that, which is awesome. So they will not be killing themselves on that. And then on this right side here, I made a little barber shop. So you got like the little chair and then the sinks, and I just put some looms because that kind of makes sense. And I got a couple coat hangers, and I think eventually I'll put a ladder here because there's a ton of room on the top here. Yeah, so we've got a ton of room in this like attic area. I think I might put like an automatic wool farm or something so I actually have wool. But yeah, that about wraps it up for today's video. I'm definitely going to choose some better books for next episode because I want this series to have some substance to it, and it's hard to have substance in a video when all I do is rant. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to see future episodes, be sure to subscribe. But yeah, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day. Also, thank you guys so much for 100 subscribers. That is crazy.